Okay, so hopefully you've gone and watched that and paused me and you're back. Great. So, what we have seen in the history of PR is that it's largely been about press agents and companies and how they've managed impressions of their clients through news stories, events, and the use of narrative to tell stories that benefit them. So many have argued that public relations has become a cultural phenomenon that affects all other kinds of communication. So the focus is not only on delivering facts, but on managing how the audience experiences facts and information in relationship to recognizable narratives. So if we think back to things like genres from film, like we're being asked through the tactics of PR and its appeals to emotion to call up familiar stories and engage them in ways that are beneficial to corporations. So this is called framing, right? Which our TED Talk, Nate Kendall Taylor, does a much better job explaining than I can here. This is his specialty. So now that we've all watched that, I'd like us to take that information and use it to think about the framing of the crisis of COVID-19 in different contexts, and also thinking about what Dr. Aronchik's article is looking at. So I personally spent the beginning part of the pandemic stuck in New Zealand, which was supposed to be a very short vacation to visit my sister, and got stuck for quite some time because of the severity of the lockdown. But it was really striking how different the pandemic was being communicated, right? So it was a site of a lot of debate and hostility here in the United States, and still is to this day. And whereas in New Zealand, it had a very different sort of framing and the way, and I think rather than trying to explain that, I think it might be interesting for you to see that. So here's an ad that was airing while I was there.
COVID-19.
It's like nothing we've ever faced.
I'm no expert, but this is a big deal.
The virus is all up in our faces now.
Things could get tough.
Our humanity will be tested.
Farnak, we have work to do.
COVID-19, you dick.
We need to set a target and go for it.
Work hard, smash it.
We must act.
Every single one of us.
Unite. Everyone needs to dig deep. We must be calm now.
Be kind.
And be patient.
Don't panic.
Don't be an egg.
Listen to the experts.
When you're asked to do something,
Do it. Please.
Unless you're being asked to buy all the toilet paper, don't do that. You don't need to buy all the toilet paper.
A bit of aroha goes a long way.
Let's all unite against COVID-19.
Together, united, all of us.
We got this.
So those are all celebrities in New Zealand. And in case anyone heard that, one of the things they said is don't be an egg means don't be stupid. Like it means, anyway, in slang in New Zealand culture. But the point being that this is a drastically different tone. It's very warm, it's convivial, it's social, it's all about we're all in this together. And so if you think back to the way that Nat Kendall Taylor talks on the effects of framing, we can also look at differing approaches to that kind of communication with public policy, right? He talks about that method of thinking about managing the drug crisis by thinking of getting people to perceive themselves as being together as a way to really shift policy support. This is really drastic from what you see here on the left. This is actually a UK ad, but there were similar ones in the United States that really, this is a government-produced public service poster that's here on the left from the NHS, and it's quite frightening and has a sort of militaristic sense to it. Like everything about it is black and red and really intense, as opposed to just kind of, this is a shitty thing that we're all stuck in together. So let's figure out how to navigate it, which I think is more the strategy that New Zealand took in the way that it was communicating to people. Both of these are public service announcements. One is a public service poster, the other is a public service announcement. A PSA is typically a 15 to 60 second video or audio report, usually created by governments or sometimes agencies like health agencies in order to inform the public. This was a big part of broadcast television and radio, but these now often appear through social media and other forms. So, according to an article published in the International Law Association Reporter, both domestic and international developments indicated that the multitude of potential frameworks and responses to COVID-19 pandemic, so it sort of measured all of the different ways that this was being talked about, and said that they ranged from public health to human rights and from national security to structures of global economy. And the American model was much more of a national security model and structures of global economy. And these frameworks sort of have very different stories that they're calling up for us and asking us to engage in, right? Importantly, not all of them are equal in terms of legal plausibility or regard for social impact and medical usefulness. So the language of war was a typical example of response. And they have stories of war have the potential of expanding executive power, so increasing tensions between states, and they can enable measures that are both militarized, medically counterproductive, and socially destructive, which I would argue this far on from the pandemic we see has happened in spaces that went more with this kind of narrative framing of what was happening. So in addition to how governments have addressed policy and communication around policy, the ways in which they are framing medical data or framed medical data at the time revealed a lot about how they were working to manage their own response and how it was being perceived and understood. So they often framed disparities in infection rates and the severity of illness by moving responsibility, much like if we think back to Lee and the Ludlow massacre, moving responsibility off of the administration when it was the Trump administration in particular and onto individuals. So Fauci and the then Surgeon General Jerome Adams went on record saying that the exponentially higher deaths of COVID-19 among the Black community were the result of pre-existing health problems and individual risk factors. Fauci eventually walked that back, thankfully. But these statements were met with important criticisms, of course, for how they worked to hide the unequal access to health care, greater exposure through underpaid, dangerous jobs, and other consequences of systemic racism that led to disparities in exposure and severity of illness in vulnerable populations. So, Sky professor Dr. Khadija White, who is one of my professors as well, did an amazing job on Twitter responding to this as it happened. So you can read some of her tweets here on the left, noting that people were often being diagnosed more regularly because they were also the same people who were expected to stay working as essential workers in grocery stores and Amazon plants and all of these spaces, right? And how it erased these distinctions and also often lack of regular health care. So switching now to different conversations about global crises, we can talk about greenwashing. And greenwashing is the method of trying to frame a company as being concerned about the environment, right? In 1992, the Federal Trade Commission first issued its Green Guides. These were guidelines to ensure that environmental marketing practices didn't run afoul of its prohibition against unfair or deceptive acts or practices. In other words, by 1992, there had already been enough deceptive green ads for the Federal Trade Commission to step in and say, actually, we need to make sure that this doesn't happen. Like, you guys can't claim to be green when you're not. You can't claim to be environmentally helpful in some capacity when you're clearly not. So as concern about global warming has grown in recent years, green marketing and public relations now extends into nearly every part of business and industry, from product packaging, using buzzwords like recyclable, biodegradable, compostable, refillable, sustainable, renewable, buildings and textiles, renewable energy certificates, carbon offsets, funding projects to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, etc. Although plenty of companies make claims about providing green products and services, only a few of them have actually infused environmentally sustainable practices throughout their corporate culture and production. Being able to tell the difference between these is really important and essential to our understanding of environmental issues and how we can be sure that we as consumers are making smart choices and putting pressure where it should be on the corporations to produce things differently and be more responsible. So greenwashing is only one strategy which corporations try to present an image of themselves as being responsible when often their practices are not. There are other ways that this happens outside of ecological concerns, where a corporation might be interested in making themselves appear to be interested in a common good or performing a social service. And one way that they might be doing this is speaking on social issues, and this is where we get into the concept of corporate social responsibility. So we've seen some of these attempts in our section on crisis management, where the corporation is projecting itself as responsible for a social issue by leading classes and education of its community, like of its workers and its clients, when in reality, right, maybe not so much. And they often work to comment on or participate in a culturally or politically significant moment. And criticism suggests that this arises less from an already existing crisis in the company's image than in its desire to attach itself to a community, right? So this is where corporate social responsibility is distinct from crisis management. In the case of corporate social responsibility, it sees that there's something significant happening socially or culturally, and it becomes very interested in inserting itself as the corporation into that dialogue, into that conversation, into that social event where it can make itself appear to be morally correct and good, right? So one really, really unsuccessful version of this was Pepsi's super tone-deaf attempt to appropriate the anti-police brutality protests, somehow suggesting that Pepsi was part of this social moment. So here is a video, both of the ad and with running text over it on people's objections to it and what they found to be really egregious about it. So the campaign notably celebrated a white woman's gesture of goodwill in the form of Pepsi that she hands to a police officer, and suggested that could be the cure, that could sort of be a curative act of diplomacy. And this not only reduced the severity of the issue, but the video itself also enacted notably problematic interactions between Jenner and other actors in the video. And the result was that this became an image crisis for both the company and for Jenner. I'm going to screen this video now for you.
We are the chosen. We're gonna shine now. The dark. Yeah, we are the movement. This generation. The dark. We are the movement. This generation.
Okay, so finally, another way that corporations have long managed their image and people's perceptions of them, this kind of another version of corporate social responsibility, has been through philanthropy or financial gifts to charities or public cultural institutions like libraries and museums, or humanitarian rights charities. And we saw a lot of this when we were talking about Ivy Lee's management of the image of the Rockefellers after the Ludlow strike and the deaths from anti-union actions. So one way new models of corporate social responsibility work is to fold philanthropy, the philanthropy of a company or its owners, into not only its image, but into how it sells its products, offering ways in which consumers can feel like their purchases allow them to contribute in some way towards a cause while building a relationship with the company or the brand. So these tactics, like greenwashing or association with social issues outside of the company, can often obscure the unethical practices of the company and produce a feel-good image. So this video, and it's quite long, I'm not going to start it here, but it's linked for you as well as optional, but I really recommend you watch it. It's a really great description of this, and the RSA videos are really fun little animations. So it's a theorist talking in the background, a not unproblematic theorist, but in this case, his description of contemporary philanthropy is, I think, a very interesting one that's important to us and how we can think about brand identities in this moment. and I hope you'll find the animation fun and compelling. Okay, so we're at the end of the lecture for this week. It was a long one. Thanks for sitting through it with me. To recap, we've looked at a lot of the ways that PR and framing condition how companies communicate to audiences in order to manage their own images, and how through tactics of framing and things like corporate social responsibilities, they can encourage audiences to participate in that image construction and feel a part of it. So it becomes even more essential that we practice media literacy and awareness of the structures behind the media that we consume, and always ask who makes it, with what resources, and to whose benefit, and analyze the content and framing of what we see through those questions. Cultural studies tells us we can question the stories that encapsulate the information that we receive, and even through social media, even though social media is a site of public relations campaigns specifically, like social media is the world of public relations, and the logic of spin more generally for all of us to engage in. It also offers us an opportunity to question with one another in public the kinds of messages that we're being fed. For instance, the fact that Pepsi ad exists is one thing, but the fact that there gets to be a huge social conversation about it means that space becomes like a vital one for critique, even if it's also a space where public relations is constantly being enacted. So with all that, I will leave you with a Drake meme, which I know is now very dated, but forgive me, pointing out the hypocrisy of corporations spending large sums of money to create and air ads in the midst of COVID-19 that promote their own image of social concern by thanking essential workers, while the companies themselves often continue to not provide paid time off, or even lay people off and fire people, or deny them health care during the crisis. So this is just one example of how we can become aware of, analyze, and challenge framing. So what are some of the other ones that come up for you when you think about this? The following slides after this will be references, and you'll be able to find that in the PDF of today's lecture. Again, please be sure to check out your classmates' mass media mini lecture this week, and I really look forward to reading the questions that come up for you guys. Great, thank you so much, guys. Have a good night. Bye.